Good to see you here today, folks. Thought you might want to see this truck. Here it goes. All right, now I want to tell you a story about the truck and the motor over here. And I got this motor out of a 1998 Chevrolet Silverado. It belonged to my brother-in-law, Don Sinclair, and it was worn out, and so he gave me a good deal on it. I bought the whole truck, took the motor and the transmission out of it, and took the motor and transmission out of it, and took the motor apart. It was worn out. He had some, it was overheated, and he put a stop leak in it, and it stopped up all the water jackets and everything. So I took it out, and I took it down to Woodruff Machinery, and I had them boil it out. Then they bored the cylinder out. They turned the crankshaft on it. Then they redid the heads and reground the valves and cleaned it all up. And they put the cam bearings in it. So then I brought the motor home and I put it back together. Got some parts from Napa Joe there at Odin. New pistons and new bearings and new rings and all that stuff. And I put the motor back together. I got me a high-rise manifold from eBay, just a cheaper one. It's an air gap 4-barrel high-rise. I took the fuel-injected unit off of the engine. It had a throttle body fuel injected, but it was worn out too, and so I took it apart and took it off, and I put the carburetor, I bought me an Elderbrock carburetor and put on it, and put the motor back together, put an RV cam in it, nothing really special, but and put some chrome on it to decorate it a little bit, and I put it in this my hot rod I was building. I worked for 13 years on this hot rod. It was a 1940 Chevy truck when I started, and I put it together one piece at a time, like the Johnny Cash movie says. Well, I was working on it one day. I had the motor in, and I had the headers on it, but they didn't have any muffler or exhaust pipe on it. And this story is, I've had a lot of requests to tell this story. When I mentioned the burned hole in my flannel shirt, somebody had a lot of requests for a story about a fire. And this is the biggest fire story that I've got to tell you. It was requested, like I say, so many. Well, it was requested once, okay? Well, Jake Hayes asked me to hear about a story, so really that's about all I've got to go on, so here we go. I was working on it one day, and the motor wasn't running quite right, but it was running. And I had it sitting in the garage just like this, but it was summertime, and I had the door open. And my neighbor, when I lived in Odin, this was when I lived in Odin, my neighbor Harold Williams came over. Willie, he was a good neighbor. And he came over and he was just watching me work on it. He was standing in the front of the door. Well, I had the motor running, and he was standing there, and I reached over to the carburetor on the motor, and I flipped the throttle open real quick. Well, when I flipped that throttle open, all of a sudden, there was a big ball of fire come out from underneath the car, went way up in the air and way around me and way around my arm, and it scared me to death. It was like an explosion. It was such a big ball of fire. And I let off the throttle, and I looked around for a blanket or something to throw on the fire to put it out, and all of a sudden it went out. And then all of a sudden, it was all quiet, because the motor died, and it was all quiet. And you could hear water, or sound like water, but it was oil dripping off the bottom of the motor. And what had happened, there was oil all over the floor, a puddle of oil everywhere on the floor. And what had happened was the oil filter had rocked loose, and it broke the seal on the oil filter where it fits on the motor, sprayed oil into that exhaust frame, and it was just like a jet explosion. It just blew that oil caught on fire and made a big ball of fire around me. But when I let go of the throttle, the exhaust kind of shut down and the fire went out. So I was lucky there. I look and Willie's standing at the door still. He's got on a pair of khaki shorts, tennis shoes, and he's standing there and he's got oil sprayed from his knee down to his shoes. His legs are just got oil sprayed all over them. There's oil all over the floor and there's oil dripping everywhere because that oil filter blew up. His eyes are great big, and he says, I've never seen anything like that in my life. And he says, and I'm going home and I'm not coming back to watch you ever again. He did later come, when he calmed down, he did later come back. I went down to Napa real quick and I bought a big bag of oil dry to throw on the floor to soak up all that oil. And I went in the house and I got online and I ordered 2 fire extinguishers. And I didn't go back out to the garage again until I had those 2 fire extinguishers hanging on the wall of the garage around this truck, because it was the biggest fire I've ever seen. That just happened so quickly. It just exploded, engulfed the motor and my arm and everywhere. But we got it cleaned back up. Now what caused it? You know, it took me a while to figure out. I put another oil filter on and tightened it back up, and it did the same thing, only it didn't catch fire, it just leaked. But here's what happened. When I put this motor in, I remember I had it all put together and painted and it was really looking good, and I put it in the truck and I bumped that oil filter pretty hard on the frame when I was when I was putting it down in there. Never thought a thing about it. But what happens is there's a plate up inside that motor where the oil filter screws on, and I had cracked that just a little bit, and the bolt, it broke it in half, but the bolt was still holding it in place. But as the motor run, that plate would shake loose, let the oil filter loose just a little bit so that it would spray oil out into that exhaust. I replaced that plate, put a new oil filter on it. I've never had trouble with it again. But that was the big fire. That's the story of the big fire. It was scary. It was a scary thing. It took me a long time to find out what caused it. So I guess I've told the story now. I've talked enough. I just love it when I start this motor on this truck and I hear it hit and it fires off, and it's got 2 glass pack mufflers on it now. And I'm an old time hot rodder. When I was in high school, I had that 57 Chevy. I wish I'd have had this motor to put in it. That would have been a lot of fun. I had a lot of fun with it anyway, but I had a 283 in it, motor 283 in it, and I just did a lot of work on it all the time. We were working on it. Probably had 2 different 283s and a lot of different parts on it. And my good friend Dave Merrifield, I've talked about before, he's gone now and I love him. He taught me everything I know about motors and about working on things, and I wish he could see this one right here now. He'd be happy with it. I'm going to try to start it again just to finish it up, because I love to hear it. And we'll see. See if it starts. Oh yeah, there you go. God bless you. God bless the benefits we have in the country. Closing this out with a picture of the truck in the early days of construction. It was just fitting the motor in to see how it was going to work, and it was all just a dream back then. And now you see the finished product. I'm going to finish with a quote from Ray Wiley Hubbard that some people get religion when they see the fire, but others when they feel the heat. God bless you, and thanks for watching.